America. I'm Erick Erickson. These are your 4 things to know this afternoon, the important stories that sometimes get buried by the salacious stories. Up first, Europe's new arms deal for Ukraine, the American arsenal, and a Trump doctrine that's taking shape. We need to start with what may look bland on paper, but spells a major policy transformation, almost Reagan-esque here. 4 European NATO partners, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, have announced a joint $1 billion purchase of American weapons for Ukraine. This isn't just routine support. It marks a shift in the pipeline. Instead of the U.S. directly shipping arms to Kyiv, our European allies are dipping into their own pockets using a NATO-backed program to buy high-priority U.S.-made systems for Ukraine's desperate defense. How did we get here? Well, the Trump administration, under mounting pressure to make Europe pay its fair share, rolled out this new mechanism after the July NATO summit. NATO's new support and procurement agency now coordinates the purchases of U.S. arms to Europe, reflecting Trump's long-held insistence that if America is to remain NATO's great arsenal, the burden has got to be shared. While the United States aid to Ukraine continues, it's at a slower clip. The move puts the onus on Europe to lead the way in Ukraine's defense, with the U.S. positioned more as the arsenal of democracy than the first responder. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark together make up $500 million of the initiative, while the Dutch alone have put up another $579 million. Air defense, more missiles, and fresh ammunition will flow to the front lines in Ukraine over the coming months. The message to Moscow is clear. The alliance endures, but it now comes with Europe's checkbook in the lead and American manufacturing on the invoice. Behind the applause, though, there are some questions. Will it be enough to stop Russia's grinding assault? As America's role shifts from direct patron to preferred supplier, does the West hold together? Or does the alliance merely buy political cover for Washington to slowly walk away from Europe? It looks like the president is doing a Reagan-esque move towards making the United States the arsenal of democracy and making Europe actually cover the costs. Up next, we need to turn to the National Weather Service's staffing whiplash as climate warnings are happening. The National Weather Service has decided to begin rehiring staff that were laid off during the DOGE cuts. It's definitely a change in policy here. They're scrambling to rehire after the deep cuts. In a Washington parlor game that should concern anyone living in a hurricane area, flood area, or tornado country, the National Weather Service has decided it's got to rehire 126 frontline mission-critical jobs, mostly meteorologists, hydrologists, and technicians, after nearly 600 staff were either retired early or pink-slipped as part of the Trump administration's DOGE cuts to the federal workforce. This is not just bureaucratic belt-tightening. The cuts gutted some essential field offices, it turns out. It forced multiple closures and left key regions like Houston, Texas, without local leadership right as severe flooding and hurricane season approaches. The about-face comes after public and internal alarms that the agency simply wasn't ready to handle this year's onslaught of weather disasters, and particularly the growing hurricane season as the waters begin to warm during August, as usually happens. In fact, weather balloon launches critical to modern forecasting were slashed. Basic 24/7 coverage in some offices simply evaporated. Now the National Weather Service is playing catch-up with reality setting in. You can't balance the budget on the backs of public safety, especially as climate-driven severe weather grows more volatile, or at least that's the claim. But the bottom line is that we're headed into the August, September, October hurricane season where the waters in the Gulf are unusually warm, and we're missing the people to launch weather balloons. The deep story is about priorities. The climate's more erratic. The stakes are higher. Washington staff cuts came not with a scalpel, but with a hatchet. Now, we're months later. There's a partial reversal. There are attempts to restore jobs. Hurricane season is looming. Staff morale is battered. The lesson's pretty clear here. The politics playing with clouds or politics at everyone's peril. To be clear, however, the cuts are no way implicated in the National Weather Service or the failures with flooding in Texas Hill Country. The National Weather Service had nothing to do with that situation. They got the alerts out on time. But what we are finding is that they took a hatchet instead of a scalpel to the National Weather Service, and some of the jobs that were lost actually were mission critical, including the launching of weather balloons and services related to water monitoring in the Gulf of Mexico in the run-up to hurricane season. Now we got to turn to Texas specifically, the Democrats, the FBI, and what's happening with the redistricting fight in that state. It's got national implications. Texas Democrats are facing a GOP-engineered redistricting plan that would cement further Republican dominance. They're doing what modern Democrats have long done, and now the Democrats are cornered. They left the state. It's what they usually do. Their absence broke quorum in the Texas House, stalling the Republican redistricting push. This time, the stakes went up a lot. U.S. Senator John Cornyn, a moderate end of the spectrum Trump ally, publicly called on the FBI to aid Texas law enforcement in locating and potentially arresting the Democrats. They're now hiding in other states, from Illinois to New York. Cornyn's rationale: legislators have a duty to show up, not run out, and state law authorizes civil arrest for such a walkout. But calling in the feds crosses a line rarely breached in American constitutional history. Cornyn's letter notes possible crimes, raising questions of bribery and public corruption, that funding or coordination for the lawmakers' trips could violate federal law. Now, this isn't the first time Texas Democrats have broke quorum and fled the state, but with the Trump Justice Department emboldened and Republicans calling for arrests, the temperature has certainly never been higher. On one side, there's the principle of legislative accountability. On the other, the willingness to use federal power to resolve a state-house standoff. It's hardball politics, and the real risk here is that the political dispute morphs into a criminal matter and sets a dangerous national precedent Democrats could also use against Republicans. We are headed towards untrodden ground here. Now, we should actually demand Democrats face the music. Republicans are respecting the constitutional limits that they've got. The urge to criminalize political opposition is a powder keg, regardless of which party lights the fuse. Democrats, though, literally running out of the state to avoid having to do their job. It's something, well, maybe the feds do need to be involved with. Lastly, in a nightmare for Greta Thunberg, across the equator, a headline that says a lot about where the world and the energy industry truly stands. BP, British Petroleum, has just announced the largest oil and gas discovery in 25 years deep under Brazil's Santos Basin. The Mubarangue find, believed to be the British company's biggest since the 1999 Shah Deniz strike, promises a major new production hub, potentially boosting BP's output and extending the company's fossil fuel footprint well into the 2030s and 2040s. For BP, battered by underperforming shares and shaken investor confidence, this is a strategic pivot away from the green dream of just a few years ago, back into the fossil fuel trenches where they belong. There's a twist. Early assessments show unusually high carbon dioxide levels in the gas associated with the find, raising questions about the project's long-term economic and environmental impact. Now, Brazilian officials are hailing this discovery as promising and strategic. Climate advocates are naturally branding it a dire threat ahead of the upcoming COP30 climate talks, ironically held in Brazil. They're warning that such mega projects will lock in high emissions for decades. BP says it's just exploring commercial feasibility, but the analysis, it's pretty clear. This could be a company-changing bet on oil and gas, just as global leaders call for a phase-down of fossil fuels. For the energy world, the contradiction grows sharper. Western governments commit to net zero on paper, while the industry plays for high stakes in the world's remaining frontiers. For conservatives, it's a reminder energy security and economics still trump, no pun intended, idealistic targets, at least for now. That's your 4 things to know this afternoon. Europe's buying America's weapons for Ukraine. The National Weather Service is rehiring in time for hurricane season. Texas politics teeters on the edge of federal intervention. And big oil is still betting on new frontiers in fossil fuels. For all the think pieces about realignment, chaos, and the new normal, the lesson today is pretty simple. In politics and policy, the old rules keep meeting, and reality and the rest of us have to weather the storm. I'm Erick Erickson. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/EW Erickson. And as always, stay informed, stay grounded, and please, above all else, keep the faith.